Hi everyone, I'm Tracy Mode, and today we are going to practice painting a tree. And this tree today that I want to do is a birch tree. I love the white bark in these trees and they just are really cool to me. It's just fun to play with the reflected color into that bark, and so that's what we're going to do. I started with a drawing. I have a drawing just really simple. Nothing spectacular or fancy about this. I'm just going to be negative painting around the drawing and then working on some texture in the bark. So one of the things I want to mention is in drawing trees, I use my whole arm as I'm drawing a line like that, and when I'm doing straight lines as well, or like telephone lines or anything like that, I use my whole arm. It's much easier than trying to sketch this way. It's just quick strokes. So this tree, I am looking at a reference photo, and I'm just going to pretty much contour draw the trunk and coming all the way up, coming to the other side, and just paying attention to the curviness of the line. And it's a little fat right there. I don't want a fat trunk. So again, it's not meant to be anything perfect. So we're just going to come off the side. This particular variety of birch has branches that kind of come off in a Y shape. And so that's what I'm looking at. And I'm going off of this side and off to the edge. And I just will draw this onto my watercolor paper in this fashion. I don't want to draw a tree like this. Birch tree, no, that's just silly, but that's what we tend to do, is draw very maybe straight lines, kind of hard branch coming off, instead of keeping the shapes a little bit more organic and flowing. So let's get started painting this birch tree practice painting. I'm going to grab a paper towel real quick. I always have a paper towel handy to soak up excess paint and water. And I'm going to start here by mixing up a couple of different puddles of paint. I'm going to be using a number 8 Utrecht Sablette round. Holds a pretty good amount of paint and water. I'll start with a mix of Cerulean Blue, Holbein, I believe, and get that somewhat diluted. It's easier to see in this palette if it's running. That's a little bit sluggish, but it's still moving on the palette. So I would say that was more of a creamy version versus like really running wild and free, as in a mixture that would be more like a diluted tea mixture. I just added a little Holbein lavender to that. That's one of my colors that I've recently come back to using. I had it kind of forgotten. It was tucked away in a bin and I ran across it. I was like, I need to start using that color. It's so nice. I really love it for skies with that cerulean blue. And next on the color list is burnt sienna, and this is Holbein. I'm going to add some water to that and get it flowing a little bit. The mixtures that I have here on my palette, I'm going to be painting into, that was really good, wet surface. I'm not going to worry about the spots I just put on there. That might kind of actually add to my painting. So let's see, got a little sidetracked there. Holbein, no, not Holbein, Daniel Smith Alizarin, and diluting that a little bit. And like I was saying, I don't think I finished. When I have a wet paper, the mixture of paint that I'm adding to that doesn't I don't want that to be too thick or it won't flow enough, but I don't want it to be too diluted or it's going to flow and disappear into that water. So this is something that comes with time, that you get used to the feel of the paint to water ratio. So that's why it's so important to keep practicing, keep painting, keep messing around with mixing colors and the different ways of applying it too. You know, wet into wet or dry onto dry, and just see and experiment and discover how those different applications work. That's really important for your growth. Now I'm going to get Sap Green. Again, I'm going to dilute it a little bit with some water. And I may be adding more pigment to this as I go. I'm not sure, but once I get started, I'll get a feel for how much or how little I need. I may be lifting some out. It just depends. So I'm going to add a little bit of that burnt sienna to my sap green mixture. That's going to tone it down a smidgen. And maybe a little bit, a tiny touch of the alizarin. Alizarin is a cool red, and green and red are going to neutralize each other, so that's why I did that. I think I want a little bit more of that. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside. Get some clean water, and I'm going to start just coming along the branches and the trunk. Clear water, and we're going to just be dropping in the color to that. And I'm going to be paying attention because I added water over there first and I'm coming over here. I want to make sure that this is staying moist as well. So if it starts to dry out, I'll just drop in a little bit extra water. Not a big deal, but mostly I just want to get some water in here to begin with. First step. And this Arches 140-pound cold press has a nice tooth to it. So some of this pigment, it's going to be pretty thick right there. I think I'm going to thin that down as I go by adding just a touch of water into my brush and letting it dilute. I don't want that super dark. Maybe a little bit darker. So just touching in those areas that it's wet. Negative painting around my tree trunk and branches. And moving around paper too to make sure that I get that paint into those areas before they dry. And then I'm going to spread some of this out. It looks a little thick in some spots and a little thinner in some, which isn't a big deal because it is a sky, and I'm actually going to come over the top of it in the end of this painting and add some foliage. That's my plan. So there we go. There's the sky. I'll mix a little of this alizarin in, very diluted on this one. And I think I'll add a touch of the green into that. And we're just going to drop in the color, touching my brush very lightly. I'm not digging into the paper. I'm not stroking very hard. I'll add a little bit more blue in here. The blue is going to gray that down because blue and orange are across the color wheel from each other, and that's kind of an orange tint to it. So now I'm going to come down into this area with a little sap green mixture and just keep coming down along that trunk, bringing some of that up into these areas so it looks like they belong together. They're not disconnected. That's something to keep in mind when you're painting a background and it's behind a tree, as in this case. Just make sure there's a flow going back there, so you want it to look like believable that it's behind that trunk. And then down here, I'm going to add a little bit more of that, and I'm just going to come up on the tip of my brush and just add a little bit of moisture down there and soften out those edges. All right, and now for one of my favorite colors, I'm going to put into this section here, I'm going to drop in a little bit of beautiful spring growth leaf green by Holbein. We've got some new beautiful leaves coming in. We're coming into that season. I'm looking so forward to having some sunshine and warm weather. I'm going to come down into here with it. And then we're going to let this dry and come back and do the trunk. So let's let this dry and we'll come back in just a second. Okay, so this has had a chance to dry. I let it dry for the most part all on its own, and then I came and finished it off with a hairdryer. And the reason I do it that way is because if you dry it too soon, it doesn't allow the paint to do some of the beautiful things that watercolor will do. And for instance, just settling into the grooves of the paper, some of the more granulating paints will actually settle and the more transparent color will sit up on the top. So I like to give it a chance to dry a little bit before I take the hairdryer to it. So that being said, I know it's dry enough because it's not cool to the touch and the paper has flattened back out again from being a little bit warped from the water. Next, I'm going to start adding some texture to my trunk, and the colors I'll be using for that are Cobalt Blue and some Burnt Sienna. The Cobalt Blue, both of those are Holbein, I believe. I go between Holbein, Daniel Smith, and Winsor & Newton sometimes, not as often as the other two, but I do like all three of those brands. The Burnt Sienna here that I'm going to be putting next to my Cobalt Blue is a Holbein color. And I'm going to rinse my brush off. And I want a little touch over, let's do it over here, of Opera Rose, and that's a Winsor & Newton. Holbein has a color that's called Opera that's almost identical to this, but it's a fugitive color, which I stay away from because they can tend to change color over time, and I don't want that to happen. But I do love this color, and there's just no way of mixing it. So I'm going to add some of that to this little side area of my Cobalt Blue. I want some of it pure, so I left it over there. And then again, rinsing and cleaning up my brush from the other paint, add a little bit more Cobalt, and I want that to be more blue than brown, so more of a grayish blue. I've got a 3/8 of an inch Holbein. This is El Dorado. Can't find them anymore, but I love this little brush and bought a few of them when I bought this one, so I'm glad I did that because now I can't find them and I have some extras. And I want my brush to be not drippy wet. I want it to be on the drier side, and I'm going to come on the side of this brush and come up on the corner along the trunk and then drag some of the fuller body of this brush along to get some texture. And what's going to happen is the texture of the paper, the toothiness of the paper is going to grab some of these bristles, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I've got dog hair. That's what having a studio dog does. So dragging that right along and then varying the pressure I use and coming out here and there to just add a little extra detail. I'm going to add some extra blue to that and come up into the upper area of that trunk. And now I rinsed my brush off and I want to soften some of these spots by adding some water to them. Just a little bit is going to come in here and give some of those areas a little softer look. Then what I'm going to do is drop in some other colors along here. I can add a little bit of that brown if I wanted, a little of the green if I wanted, just mixing the colors, a little more diluted than that, however. And I'm just dropping them into that wet paint. A little bit more of that purpley blue. Drop that in, and then I can come up and just play around with that texture. Come over here, and I've got a little bit of a branch coming out off the side, so I can play around with the texture over there, make it a little deeper in the crook there since it's kind of in the shadow. And I can come up in some of these branches and not even worry about putting too much texture in there because it's kind of up in the shadow area. So I'm going to soften some of those. This is just a good way to practice. You're not under any pressure to create a finished painting. It's just a practice piece to get you used to painting texture using your paint to water ratios. I'm going to now go with a smaller brush, number 2 Princeton Velvet Touch Round, and just continuing to play with the color, continuing to drop in little areas of texture, coming over on the other side, coming up on the tip of that brush, and I can deepen that even further by adding some additional color. And I'm just playing around with the color that's already on my palette there. Nothing super fancy. And just dropping it in and having fun. So this is a way that we grow, and you grow by painting, you grow by practicing, so you grow as you go. And if you never get out your brushes and practice, you're never going to see improvement. So keep on. It's a little too bright. Now when I do something like that, I just come back over the top of it with another color like the blue. I know that the blue would make that a little bit more purple, so I just put that right over the top of it. And no big deal. So as this dries, I'm going to grab some of that purple and get it a little more grayed down with the mixture over here, and I can even get a little thicker with the paint. As this is still wet and I want little darker areas, and I think actually as I'm speaking, I want a darker blue. So I want darker areas in that. So I'm going to add a darker purple. I've got a lighter version with my cobalt and my opera. And now I'm just going to add a little alizarin to my ultramarine blue, which has given me a darker purple, and I can come in with some darker accents. And I can go kind of right in here. If you put it up against the white, you get a definite pop in contrast. It's pretty cool. And I could just keep doing this all day. It's really fun. Making sure I'm leaving some lighter areas, you know, letting the white of the paper shine through. And I'm grabbing a little bit more of that pink, just very subtle, and adding some subtle detail up there. And that's about it. I can, like I said, just keep doing this all day, but in order to not make this video that long, I'm going to go ahead and let this dry and come over the top with some foliage. Okay, that was quick. It wasn't very wet, but I'm going to come in with a number 10 Utrecht round and mix up these colors that I already have here on my palette, and just get some soup, some leaf soup going. A little bit more sap green for a kind of a brown. I'm going to grab some more of that leaf green. I'm going to mix these guys all together. A little bit more sap in there. So we've got a little variety going. And then I'm going to dab off the excess moisture. I don't want it too super runny, juicy, wet, because I want it to, the brush to kind of skip over some of the paper. So holding it like this helps me actually to have more control as far as that goes, because I feel like I can lift and move it in a little bit more of a random way. So I've got my brush on its side pretty much, and the bristles, if you can see, are dragging across the texture of that paper. And so if it's too wet, it's not going to do that. It's going to be diluted and spread out. So having it a little bit drier, a little bit thicker paint mixture. That's kind of a cream, I would say. It's not running on the palette. I'm going to rinse that off because I want to get some of this leaf green kind of more by itself. Dropping that in. It's a very beautiful summer sunny green. You could also get a close green in that, and mixing some lemon yellow with maybe some sap green or cadmium. I don't usually use a lot of cadmiums. I'm going to go with some of that darker. Some of this in the shadows. I don't typically use cadmiums because they can tend to get kind of muddied up, because they're kind of chalky. So I stay away from them for the most part and go with more of the transparent colors that are similar. So I'm just going to mix a more diluted mixture of that and splatter some of that on and have fun with that. Let's come even down into the foreground a little bit. Do that with these mixtures too. A little variety. And then I can do the same with water. Add a little bit over here. Okay, so there is a very simple practice piece for you. And if you need some photo references to look at, it's a good place to go is Google. You can go Google search images, you know, type in birch tree and you can find all kinds of images to look at. So you're not just blindly going at this. That's what I do. I work better from a photograph or from real life. I am not good at inventing things in my head so much. Some people are really good at that. I'm just not. So just continuing to splatter and see how this goes. I'm coming right over the top of the trunk too. So, okay, you guys, thanks for watching. If you like this video and want to see more, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below or left or right or wherever it is on my screen. And hope to see you in the next video. Take care. Happy painting. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.